I know many of our listeners are familiar with clean energy tax credit transferability, or at least have heard of it. It's quickly becoming a key tool for helping developers finance their projects, but for distributed generation projects like C&I, commercial industrial, or community solar, transferring tax credits is still a major challenge. Finding buyers open to smaller amounts is tough, transaction costs are high, and tax credit recapture insurance is inaccessible in most cases. That's why I wanted to share a little bit more about a company that I had a chance to interview at the end of last year, Concentro. The founders, Inigo and Tao, are really revolutionizing the way the DJ developers can leverage transferability, focusing on $1 million to $30 million transactions. Concentro takes a hands-on tailored approach to make the transfer process seamless and accessible for both buyers and sellers. They connect projects to buyers, handle all the due diligence, bundle projects to get economies of scale, and manage the entire transaction from start to finish. They've built exciting AI technology to streamline the due diligence process for sub-utility scale projects. For buyers, whether individuals or corporations, Concentro offers access to fully vetted insured tax credits, helping them reduce their tax liability in a seamless way. For developers, Concentro's unique model generates higher net prices even after fees, making it a game changer for DG developers. So if you're looking for a better, more efficient way to buy or sell clean energy tax credits, I highly recommend you check them out. You could learn more about them. We'll also have it on the notes of the podcast. Their website is www.concentro.io. Thank you, Concentro, for sponsoring this episode of the Solar Maverick Podcast. Let's get into it. This is Benoy, your host of the Solar Maverick Podcast. I'm thrilled to announce that we'll be releasing our 200th episode during the week of February 24th. A huge thank you to our amazing listeners, our Mavericks, for your continued support in making this journey possible. Coincidentally, this milestone falls during Intersolar in San Diego, making it a perfect opportunity to celebrate. We're excited to host a special party to mark the occasion, and even more importantly, will serve as a fundraiser to support those affected by the devastating fires in Los Angeles, something that has personally impacted many of my friends and colleagues. If you're interested in joining us, the event will take place on February 25th from 5 p.m. to 8 p.m. in the Gaslamp District near the San Diego Convention Center. You can find the RSVP link in the podcast show notes. Let's get into it.
Entrepreneurship is not a straight line. There's days that you're making a lot of money and there's days that there's not a lot of money there. And you got to be able to focus on something greater than that to have longevity, in my opinion. And if you're doing the right thing and if you're working hard and planning accordingly, you'll succeed and you'll survive and do something better. Be passionate about it. Build a very, very strong team.
Hello and welcome to the Solar Maverick Podcast, where solar meets entrepreneurship and experience. I'm your host, Benoy Thanjan, so let's get into it.
Hi, this is Benoy Thanjan, your host of the Solar Maverick Podcast. I'm really excited to have Vishal Lala. He's the CEO of Polar Racking, and congrats, Vishal, to 15 years of the company offering superior racking solutions to the solar industry.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Benoy. I really appreciate that.
Anytime. I appreciate you making the time. We've known each other for a very long time. You're a solar maverick yourself. I mean, being an entrepreneur in the solar industry, starting a business 15 years ago in solar. Can you tell us about Polar Racking and how it got started and where you are today?
Yeah, no, I really appreciate that. Benoy, yeah, thanks for having me on the podcast and letting your listeners hear about our story. You're right. We have known each other for a really long time. I've been listening to the podcast for a really long time and finally have the pleasure of being a guest, which again, I really do appreciate. So to answer your question, Polar Racking, yeah, I appreciate you saying 15 years. This week actually marks our official 15 years from when we registered the company, although we started working on it way in advance of spending the $50 or $100 that we spent to file the registration with province of Ontario here. But yeah, we started off in Ontario as Ontario, Canada. We're Canadian, as we mentioned. And at that time, there was a Green Energy Act that came out from the government of Ontario, an extremely lucrative FIT program. And, people's jaw drops when I tell them the amounts. They're paying 80.2 cents a kilowatt hour, 20-year contract with the government of Ontario, like super AAA credit. We're the off-taker. For residential, they were paying 73 cents kilowatt hour for rooftop and 55 cents for ground mount. At that time, a requirement to qualify for the feed-in tariff was to have Ontario-made racking, Ontario-made inverters, and Ontario-made modules. So it was pretty wild. From a zero solar industry, we had hundreds and hundreds of solar companies, not only developers and EPCs, but manufacturers. So 6 racking companies show up in Canada, Solar Canada 2010, probably the same amount of inverter companies, and then a dozen module companies that were making modules in Ontario. It was a really, really wild time, and we were one of those companies. What differentiated us, from the start, was we designed a product that was built for the market. Again, originally it was rooftop companies, so people building on flat rooftops, in the snow and ice of February of Canada winters. And, we designed a solution with very few components, very high quality, and it took off, and we became the largest rooftop racking manufacturer pretty much out of the gates. And about 10 years ago, we transitioned into ground mount because the market here transitioned into ground mount. And now we're exclusively ground mount. So we're, fixed tilt ground mount. We have single axis tracker, and we work on solar carports as well. And we're coming up with a line of agrivoltaic products, but all focused on the ground. So ground foundations and all that fun stuff.
Yeah, definitely. I appreciate you explaining. Congrats on 15 years. Can you talk about how many megawatts to date your racking solution has been incorporated and potentially the pipeline going forward?
Yeah, for sure. So we're over 4 gigawatts worth of projects now. Mostly in Canada, but a lot in the US. So you'll find us in Canada all the way from Eastern Canada to British Columbia on the west, that we have the furthest northern solar project in the world at a national research facility, not too far from the North Pole. We also have a lot in the Caribbean. So you name the island, we're there. And again, we've taken off there because we have a very robust solution that's very, very easy to put together, very intuitive to put together. And then we're in a lot of states. I can't say every state, but California, Texas, and Minnesota. But our stronghold is the Northeast right now. So we're doing lots and lots of community solar. New York, Maine, Maryland, Massachusetts, you name it in the Northeast, where we're present, New Jersey. So yeah, we're there.
That's pretty amazing to hear. And just a question is how is your racking solution handle the snow load? Obviously the wind in the north, but then also if you're in the Caribbean as well, right? There's potential hurricanes.
100%. Yeah, it's a very good question. Basically, from the start, we've always focused on this market. Generally, it appeals more to owners, right? So we've always been extremely high quality, very robust solutions, and very robust foundation as well. So we spend a lot of time and effort to make sure that we have the right foundation. Not only that is the right foundation design, but the right foundation is in the ground and put there properly, and very low part count. So what other people will do is they'll put a lot of parts, put more onto labor than the racking, and then more points of failure. They're putting the thinnest possible steel, and they're literally shipping steel to the field. That's the opposite of approach to us. We're very robust. We show up when we deliver the product. We train people on how to put the product together. We're around a lot. So, a lot of times where we've seen failures, it's been because people just have not assembled it properly, or they haven't, not failures with us, but, with others. Is, for example, we built a project in Virgin Islands, it was a rebuild. There was a 6 megawatt that got blown away, with the heavy winds of one of the hurricanes, and then they rebuilt it with us. But when we went back to look at what had been done, there's a lot of questions about the racking system, but then it was very obvious, a lot of that wasn't installed properly. So we spent a lot of time training on site, adding value, showing people how to put together, make sure that they're doing it right. Because as much as we want people to read our manuals, they don't necessarily do that, but we're there to show them. Ultimately, the job is theirs, but we want to be a partner in the project because we know that these are 25, 35, 40-year projects, right? So we want to see things done right. We feel that benefits us in the long term, again, with a lot of owners that we work with, and it feels like it benefits the entire solar industry because, a bad project reflects bad on all of us at the end of the day, right? So
It definitely does. And that was an interesting point to your response, was that you really represent owners, right? And so you're trying to basically provide the highest racking solution at a good price, right? Versus there's some racking companies that have extremely low prices, but then their quality is not as good, which it sounds like is an issue in the industry. Is that correct?
yeah, 100%. Yeah, we definitely focus on value. That's what we're selling, like your lowest overall cost. And we, not only from buying it, installing it, and owning this thing for the next 25, 35 years. And that's where we feel we bring the most value. And, it's an interesting industry that we work in. A lot of decisions being made just on the spreadsheet and, the lowest number in there. And, an EPC will pick the lowest price product to put into the project, then their warranty is 1 year. And then after 1 year, it's the owner's problem to deal with. And the owners are learning now that, saving on that. And again, like I say, saving, like, we're extremely competitive in the market. So I don't want to give the misinterpretation that we're not competitive, but you really want to focus on someone with a track record, like we said, 15 years, like someone that's done the engineering, that's proved it out. And, I'll give you an example. Like, we did a job in Summerside, P. For those of you that are not familiar with PI, think of like north of Maine almost. And so all the way east coast Canada, and there was a hurricane that came up across through the Caribbean, right by the US, Hurricane Fiona a couple of years ago. And there's two projects in Summerside PI, and Summerside PI, like PI as the province is extremely small, and Summerside is even smaller. And there's a 13 megawatt there that, someone else provided, and there's a 27 megawatt that we provided. And these are, a mile apart. And the heavy winds came, the hurricane did not come through Summerside PEI, and, their system bent in two. And because, they didn't understand the ground, they had the wrong foundation design. And then again, like, they didn't have, a robust system that's meant to be like, on a solar site next to an ocean, let's say. And, we size our members accordingly, but when we know we're building in Summerside PEI that has heavy wind, heavy snow, we're designing for heavy wind, heavy snow. And, the interesting story about that project, actually, now that it comes to mind, because now I'm starting to remember, is the project manager for the site that we supplied, the 27 megawatts that had no damage at all, called me during the construction and said, hey, the other guys were by and they're saying, like, we're going so much faster on our site. Like, look at our beams. Our beams are so much lighter so the guys can work it, faster. And again, like, trust me, if we're in another location, we have lighter beams also. But if we're next to the ocean and there's, 60 pounds of snow, like, we're going to size the system accordingly. And, a few months later, this event happened. I went back to my engineering team at the time. I'm like, hey guys, like, why are they so much lighter? Like, obviously the most of the cost that we have is steel. So, I wanted to confirm with my guys, like, are we over designing? And everybody confirmed, like, no, this is the right design for this site. And, in that case, the site was owned by a municipality and we want to do the right thing. And we know these projects need to be there for 35 years. And, 2-3 months later, like, this hurricane force winds come by, or these heavy winds, I should say, come by. And, the same guy called me back. He's like, thank God, man, we did the right thing here, right? Those are the small wins that I'll take. Again, I never want anything bad to happen on any of the sites because I think it reflects on all of us, but we're always striving to do what's right. We're always striving to bring quality and value to all of these sites and, advise our clients accordingly. So
Yeah, that is huge. Obviously, it's a collaborative and consultative process. I've seen your team, at the different conferences, spend a lot of time, walking through potential customers with your different solutions. And it sounds like you're always innovating. I feel like every year, the designs are changing. And I think another key aspect too to talk about, if you're able to simplify the construction of the racking, that the customer saves on labor cost, which is a huge thing. Can you go into that? I know.
yeah, absolutely. That prevailing wage sites now all over, the wage rates are very expensive. I mean, we see it firsthand on the projects that we work on, especially in the US. So we know you save a day of construction on, a 7 megawatt site, you're saving $80,000 to $100,000. It's significant savings there. So we're always striving to innovate, make it simpler. If you look at our single axis tracker, you can do a lot of pre-assembly in an area of the site where if the supervisor's fully overseeing what everybody's doing in terms of the assembly, rather than mostly assembly happening like, a mile away with guys in the field that were, not necessarily working on solar, the day before they showed up to this site. So like our system offers a lot of pre-assembly advantages, a lot of ways to save labor. And to your point, Benoy, like, thanks for acknowledging that. Like we are always innovating, like, our existing products and our new line of products, like we're always finding out like, how can we be better? How can we be better? And truthfully, it's not necessarily ideas that come from us all the time. Like because we're on site so much, we're right next to the installers. We're next to the guys that are turning the nuts and bolts and asking them like, hey, what can we do better? Like, how can we do this faster? And we take all the feedback and, as much as possible and where it makes sense. And, we're always trying to incorporate that. So sometimes like we have had those comments that, someone gets an order from us today and they give us that feedback. And then a few months later, they get another order and they're like, wow, you listened to us. And again, like in the early days when it was rooftop, we were making those changes very quickly. Now the industry is a little bit more sophisticated. There's a lot more UL testing. Obviously with the tracker, there's not much more that goes through it. So we need to thoroughly test our ideas before it comes out, but we are still bringing those ideas out and, trying to stay ahead of the game, not only in product quality, but in solidity of product for sure. So
for the trackers, are you using them in colder climates?
We are, yeah. So, our tracker is very, very unique in the market. So it's not a torque tube tracker like everyone else. So like, in my opinion, I feel like everybody designed this amazing tracker and they've designed it with like an Arizona or California desert in mind. And the initial projects were in California and Arizona. So like that was like a no-brainer, or Texas or whatever you want to call it. And that's great. But what we've designed is we've come in from a different view. We've designed for, like, we're in Toronto. This is all Canadian shield. It's the same hard rock that you have all over northern New York or Massachusetts or Maine. And so we know we're going to have to use ground screws. So if you go to, a competitor site, for example, that has a tracker, like now they've designed this adapter. So it's the A-frame and then you have 2 screws to attach to your torque tube tracker. However, ours is just a single screw. So we have half the amount of screws, but we're only able to do that because, again, we've come to it thinking like, hey, the sites are customer base and the sites we work on are further north. And if we want to use helical piles, if we want to use ground screws, we're going to have to do this differently. We can't come at it with a traditional torque tube design. So we have a purlin design, much more, anyone that's worked on a fixed racking project could easily put our stuff together because it's much more like a fixed rack. However, it works well with helical piles. It works great with ground screws. It works great with ballast designs, which you can't necessarily accomplish with a torque tube system. So that's very much by design. Like, how are we going to work on these sites that are not, 1,000 acres and, flat ground? Like, we roll on hills, we attach directly to ground screws. So like, that's paying off right now. The success what we're having in these upstate New York projects. We're doing dozens of upstate New York projects now because we attach directly to a ground screw and we can go up and down hills, and the site doesn't need to be an exact square or rectangle. We have a table design that, allows you to maximize the amount of space that you have on your site and no grading. If you're grading with our system, you're grading with any system. But, we've seen crazy things and we're able to roll up and down the hills of upstate New York. It's really paying dividends now. So.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I appreciate you explaining. And you mentioned this a little bit more before, like obviously a major cost related to racking is steel. Like, how do you deal with like commodity pricing tending to go higher in price versus lower, especially something like steel? And I'm sure that's a challenging aspect of it.
Yeah, 100%. It's definitely challenging. COVID days, we lost a lot of sleep because the price of steel tripled. I want to say overnight, very, very quickly. But, the main thing is all of our competitors are all in the same boat. We're all using a lot of steel. And, generally our prices go up and down with the commodities. So we've been able to manage that. Obviously we have a certain reserve of steel that we keep on hand at all times. So we're able to lock in some prices, but it being commodity, it is an equalizer in that like we're all exposed to the same thing. It's not like, we go up and other people stay the same. So, the challenging thing is every site is different. Like today we're working on a site in Alberta, working on a site in New York, we're working on a site in New Jersey, working on a site in Texas. And, we size our members accordingly, according to the wind and the snow load. So it's not just one SKU of steel. So it is more challenging when you're trying to inventory and you're trying to predict what you need. And because, where your projects are usually, change regularly, although, we're very, very active in the Northeast now. Again, because it's a commodity, we're all subject to the same things. We're not necessarily behind our competition when things like that happen.
Yeah, that makes sense. I really appreciate you explaining. And I think you kind of already touched on this before, but how has your experience in Canada really helped with your projects in the Northeast of the US?
Yeah, I mean, look, the projects that I'm working on right now, for the most part, Rochester and Syracuse and Buffalo and in Maine, the reality is that we're closer to those sites than any of the American suppliers, right? And not only that, we just have more experience when it comes to frost. Your biggest risk, aside from electrical, is your foundation. And we have a deep understanding of how to mitigate foundation, especially when it comes to frost. And frost is a real thing. Like in the early days, like I was telling you in 2009, 2010, we weren't involved in ground mount, but people started building bigger farms, 10 megawatt, 20 megawatt, 50 megawatt farms. And there was no experience here in Canada necessarily working on solar farms. So they were bringing in, people from the US or people from Germany to design foundations. And people were just saying like, oh yeah, 6 feet I-beams all day long. Like it doesn't work here. I'm born and raised in Montreal and, we would regularly see people's fences come up a little bit every year in the winter because the frost is a very strong force that's literally pushing these piles off the ground. So when you know what you're doing, you can adequately mitigate it. You can make sure the piles are done properly, and then you don't have to worry. And Benoy, I cannot tell you how many jobs in the early days of Minnesota I lost. And they said, well, why do you want to use this helical pile? Or why are you going so deep with your I-beam? Well, we understand frost, and it's a big part of the Canadian building code. It's not so much a big part of the building code in the US. So, we're saying guys, this is where you want to be. And we lost a lot of those jobs, truthfully, and not a lot, but some of those jobs have since heaved. If I know something is wrong, I'm not going to do it, right? And again, like I said, we've been in business 15 years. We're planning on being in business many, many years longer. And, we want to elevate the game. We don't want to say, oh, well, the rest are doing it and, closing their eyes, so we're going to do it. No, let's do this right. Let people come up to our quality. We're not going to go down to that level, right? So that's what we've been doing. And again, sometimes through our own losing jobs, but I've always been someone that's thought about the long term. Let's build this extremely solid business long term, associate the name with quality, associate the name with value, and good things will happen. So
yeah, I totally agree with you. That's the way to do business. And obviously thinking about the long term and unfortunately losing business because you want to make sure that you're providing the right product. I think it's interesting too, because I feel like asset owners are getting more sophisticated. There has been a lot of underproduction of solar systems due to various reasons, but I think you're starting to see asset owners really focusing on the total solution, but also the equipment that's being used and making sure, especially with the racking, that you use a high quality solution, especially when it comes to environments with the weather can play a big issue. So have you seen that as well? Asset owners are getting more sophisticated than...
I'll answer that question in yes, we've seen people get more sophisticated and care more about what they're putting in the ground. But, at the same time, we've seen people just go extreme. Okay, worked with all this stuff it was cheap, it was untested. The team was new and we used them. And because of that, now we're only going to work this one guy, which is publicly traded company with a high market cap. But is that solution the right solution that's designed for your project in upstate New York? They'll make it work, but it's not necessarily obviously I'm very biased when I say that, but it's not necessarily the right solution. But, here we are, 15 years in business, ton of on-site support, making sure everything goes well. I mean, we have, enough references to say, how we react and how we work through situations. We're there presenting to people to say hey guys, look, this system has been designed for exactly where you're installing. Oh, ABC company burned me, so now I'm only going to work with company one. I'm okay, if ABC burnt you, now do your due diligence. See who has the experience, see who's offering value, see who understands where you're building, see who can offer you the greatest support. Don't just go from one to the other. But yes, to answer your question overall, people are definitely getting smarter. They're definitely starting to get very picky about their AVL. And I see that as a great thing, and I think that's really where we've come to shine. Like I'll say in Canada, like we're on the AVLs, like people trust us, they know us, they've seen us, we've proven ourselves time and time and time again. We're getting that in the US with marquee developers right now who care, with larger EPCs, again, who are going to be in business. Like a lot of the projects, as we know, Benoy, like people are just in till NTP or COD and they're out, and they just need to make that spreadsheet look the best. And so they'll spec something just have the lowest price per watt, but that's great for their business. And like, all this is success to you. I'm not going to tell anyone how to do their business, but if I'm owning this system for a long time, like I'm looking for someone that has a long-term view also, because especially when it comes to trackers, fixed tilt, we supply it. It's a high quality system. It's there. We never hear from our customers again, unless it's to do the next project. But with trackers, you got sensors, you got motors, you got moving parts, there's going to need maintenance. Like you need to pick a partner that's going to answer your phone when you call and you need something. We're that company and we show up, right? So
yeah, definitely. I mean, that's huge. I mean, I think I'm surprised how many people have a hard time talking to the equipment manufacturer, the racking solution, that it's hard for them to find the right person to speak to handle any requests that they might have, or the O&M company. That's pretty interesting to hear that.
Yeah, the other place we add value is like we do have another company, PRI Engineering, that we work with on the foundation design. So you talk to us, you talk to PRI, we understand foundation, we understand racking, we know how to build in these environments. Trust me, I'd love to do a 500 megawatt in California. I know I could do a great job. So if you're listening, feel free to call me, but we're bringing like a different type of value when you talk about the Northeast, when you talk about anything on the coast, even Florida, even, Texas, where, like we're bringing a differentiated value to the table here. So
yeah, definitely. I appreciate you explaining that. What trends are you seeing in the solar industry from your perspective?
Like aside from the one that we just talked about, like, more focus on quality and being more selective in terms of who people are working with, which we welcome. One trend we're trying to work on now is agrivoltaics. So we're coming up with an entire line of agrivoltaics products. So for those of you that are not familiar, it's, basically dual use, as today, as you know too well, and most of your listeners know too well, it's either farm or have a solar farm. You can't necessarily do both. And I feel like it's a trend not only in North America, but around the world, that people don't want to see all this, agricultural land disappear just to produce energy. So we're coming up with a line of agrivoltaic products. You can see it on our website. We have multiple versions, from the fence design to the umbrella design to multi-tracker design, again, which allows you to track in at different times in different directions. So you can either farm the land, or there's certain crops that grow better when they're shaded, for half the day. And, so you water and you actually are covering the crop, so the water stays there longer. It doesn't burn away necessarily. And people are getting like 3 crops a year instead of 2 crops a year like they were before, depending on what that is. And we see that as a great opportunity. Again, like we have a lot of expertise. We're very focused on innovation, but extremely solid engineering team. And, we want to be ahead always. And I think just in terms of permitting projects also, it's going to become more difficult as some of the land gets more restricted and the good land gets used, and, people start to not permit these sites otherwise. So yeah, we're trying to be ahead of the game and come out with our products now. So
that's really smart, especially with agrivoltaics. I feel like a lot of people are focusing on that. We're seeing states come out with sort of pilot programs for agrivoltaic. So that's really interesting. I thought it was interesting to see the different agrivoltaic designs that you have on your website. So I learned a lot just from looking at those designs and seeing, that solution would work depending on the type of agrivoltaic sort of service offering, if that makes sense. And then just to go, obviously you started Polar Racking 15 years ago. We need a lot of entrepreneurs in the renewable energy industry. The Solar Maverick podcast is about solar and entrepreneurship. Like, what advice would you give to entrepreneurs who are looking to get into renewables?
It's a great question. And I'll give like more general advice to entrepreneurs, and you can apply it to renewables. Like I got into renewables because I needed something to get excited about, and something that I could really be passionate about, and something, like that. I tell my son, I work in solar energy. So like, that was the reason I picked renewables specifically, because I needed a cause that I could feel strongly about. And probably just like, everyone here and everyone in the industry, like I meet so many brilliant people that could be doing so much interesting work in basically any industry there is. But, they believe in what we're doing. They believe that we're contributing to a greater cause. And you and I have spoken about this before, just doing good work and sleeping at night, right? And feeling good about what you did during the day. And I feel like the renewable energy industry really gives us that reward at the end of the day, that you work on a project and right away, 6 months later, a year later, you see the project in the ground and you see the immediate benefits of what's happening there. So I think that's a good excuse to get into renewables, in terms of entrepreneurship. I guess the first piece of advice is find something that you're passionate about, for sure, because you do need that passion. You do need something greater than making money every day. I feel to go through entrepreneurship is not a straight line. There's days that you're making a lot of money and there's days that there's not a lot of money there. And you got to be able to focus on something greater than that to have longevity, in my opinion. And if you're doing the right thing and if you're working hard and planning accordingly, you'll succeed and you'll survive. And the other thing that I'll tell you is Benoy, you and I have been in this industry for a long time. We've seen thousands of companies come and go, and biggest names that you would never expect to go, come and go. Sun Edison, when I joined the solar industry, Sun Edison was the biggest name out there and everybody wanted to work for Sun Edison and deal with Sun Edison. And, and to think of, SatCon and all these big names, and even some names recently that really surprised me that went under. But focus on bringing value to your clients, focus on doing something that's right, that's I don't believe in the me too. I believe in do something better, be passionate about it, build a very, very strong team. Build trust within your team that you guys work together, because, things are not always rosy, and team that you can go into the trenches with when times are tough. Also enjoy when times are good. And then you got to focus on, at the end of the day, being profitable. And I feel a lot of people lose sight of that. They chase the megawatts, if you want to call it. You go to the solar shows and 100 people with the bragawatts, at the Solar Fest that night, and they're telling you about the millions of gigawatts that they're doing. And no, you got to focus on your business, and you got to make sure you're making money, and you got to make sure that you're doing it right. Don't go chasing butterflies. It's, at the end of the day, the formula is pretty simple, but if you stick to the formula, you stick to the plan, you should be very successful in the end. So hopefully.
Yeah, that's great advice. I appreciate that, especially doing the right thing, consistent action, adding value, no bragawatts, real solutions. That's really helpful. It's interesting because you mentioned, obviously, the company Polar Racking has now been on business for 15 years, and you were talking about how you want it to go for many more years. What are your future plans for Polar Racking?
Yeah, we're continuing to grow. As I said, we're launching new products, we're improving existing products, and we're looking at new geographies right now. So we're looking at bringing the product into Asia, to the Middle East, to Africa. We're quoting on projects all over South America. One is expanding the product line, but two is expanding the areas that we're doing business in. It's really interesting. We had a webinar about our single axis tracker, and unbeknownst to us, we had some developers on from Saudi Arabia. And, after the webinar, they got in touch with us, and I went there last month. Pretty incredible to see a country just rebuilding. It's going to be the future here in the next 5 or 10 years. And, they're hosting an Olympics and a World Fair. And alongside that, they have a huge solar program. And we're exploring opportunities like that as well, where there's a lot of development, there's a lot of excitement, there's a lot of, obviously, funds going there, but at the same time, they're looking for quality suppliers to work with. They're recognizing that, they have one chance to build their reputation and do it right, and they want to do it with people that they can work with and that they can trust and that they know are going to bring value, right? So that's another area where we see tremendous growth for us in the future. So, which is international markets, basically.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I forgot about how many activities are planned around Saudi Arabia coming up. And then it's interesting too, because obviously they have the right climate for solar. So that sounds
for high radiance. The only thing there is dust, lots of sand, right? So, obviously we've solved that issue as well, with cleaning robots and all that great stuff. But again, I use Saudi Arabia as an example, but we're definitely looking at a lot of international markets right now. We're really excited to enter. So
yeah, that's amazing. And this has been an amazing podcast interview. Vishal, I appreciate you being on the podcast. If our audience wants to learn more about Polar Racking and you, what's the best way for them to do that?
The best way is our website, obviously. So, www.polarracking.com. I don't think anyone says www anymore, but so polarracking.com. All of our contact information is there. Depending on your product, there's a place for you to click and say, start projects or get proposal. And, once you click on that, it goes automatically into our CRM. Depending on where you are in the world, the right person will get in touch with you and start the conversation. Someone's interested in talking, I'm always happy to engage. My email address is vishal.lala@polarracking.com. Happy to engage with anyone and talk more. I mean, I always enjoy our conversations. Benoy, this is the first time we're recording our conversation, but we've had just a lot of great conversations like this, for many, many years. And I always enjoyed the opportunity to do that, especially with people that are from the industry and have the experience and just have lots to share. So,
yeah, definitely. This has been an amazing interview. I always enjoy our conversations. I definitely have to come up to Toronto sometime soon when it's warmer to discuss. And your contact information, your email, and obviously the Polar Racking website will be on the notes of the podcast as well. This has been an amazing podcast. I appreciate you and congrats on 15 years and another 15 years. And it's just great too that the interview happened to be on the week of your anniversary. So thank you for making time. I'm sure it's a pretty busy time as well with the holidays too.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, happy holidays to you. I'm not sure when this is airing, but happy holidays to you and all your listeners. And yeah, I greatly appreciate the time, Benoy. Thank you so much.
Oh, anytime. Thank you, Vishal.
Thanks for listening to the Solar Maverick Podcast. The Solar Maverick Podcast is brought to you by Reneu Energy. We're a solar development and consulting firm. If you believe that this podcast is adding value to you, please give us a 5-star review and share with those that you think could benefit from this information. Please email all questions, suggestions, and feedback to info@reneuenergy.com. That's info@reneuenergy.com. The Solar Maverick Podcast is produced by Podcast Laundry and executive produced by Benoy Thanjan and Kevin Y. Brown.